So here we are coming to a bookstore. Is this a haunt of yours?
Yeah, it's actually not particularly close to where I live, but I come here a lot because I think it's a
Because?
beautiful store.
So when you come into a bookstore, what are your expectations? What do you do when you come into a bookstore? What do you want a bookstore to be?
Well, at first I want to make sure you got my books.
Ah, so you go straight to your books?
No, not straight, but I have an eye open.
You meander to your
I
section?
meander, but I do always check it out. It's embarrassing to admit.
Why? Why would it be embarrassing?
Well, because it's a little egotistical.
Yeah, but it's your livelihood.
But I think most writers do check out their own books.
And right there.
Oh, okay. Well, they got them at least. And this new one, the 11th Hour, is the 23rd.
Wow,
So I
23
think there's
books.
23 books still in print.
Do you have trouble reading because of your eye? How do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, I can still read, but I do find that I use iPads in a way that I never used to.
Because
There's light, and because I can adjust the size of the type. So I never, ever read a book on an iPad, but now I do.
does it change the experience in
No,
any way?
not really.
Because a lot of people feel that the tactile aspect
Yeah, I mean,
of the page.
I also used to scribble on books. You know, I would make notes in the margins. And I don't do that now.
Look at these nice chairs.
Nice chairs.
When you, I think of you as incredibly widely read. Do you find that, how do you divide your time between reading and writing, and what do those hours look like?
You know, when I'm actually seriously writing, well, it depends what I'm writing. If I'm writing a novel, I tend not to read a lot of fiction.
Because it
I don't want it in my head.
taints your process?
I don't want it in my head. And when I finish writing a novel, I try and catch up.
Do you miss your characters and the events in the books
No,
when you're finished?
no.
It
When I'm really done with them when I'm done with them.
really, it's like expiating a curse.
Yeah, just, you know, okay, thanks a lot, goodbye.
The title of the book is The 11th Hour. Why the 11th hour? I mean, there is a kind of an undercurrent of death, foreshadowing death, shadows in and of themselves,
Yeah.
what death is, and so on and so forth. Why?
Well, for a start, I'm 78. So that's one reason why. For another thing, I had a fairly intimate encounter with death, you know, and got away with it. But it makes you think, you know. And so I thought this idea of running out of time was something I had on the brain. And also I was thinking, there's a famous essay by Edward Said called On Late Style, where he talks about how great artists approach the final act, you know. I mean, in the case of the essay, because Edward Said was very knowledgeable about classical music, he focuses on composers. But to put it very simply, the idea proposed is that either people become serene, you know, they become accepting and calm, and the work arises out of that sense of contentment with life and with its conclusion, or they become angry. You know? I mean, rage against the dying of the light, as Dylan Thomas said. And I remember thinking, the idea is that it's either or. You know, some writers go artists go one way, some go another. I thought, in my view, I don't think it's either or. I think you could be peaceful on Tuesday and angry on Wednesday, you know. But I wanted to consider that idea about how people face the final act, you know. And I mean, that's why it's called The 11th Hour, is because in some way all the characters are encountering that.
How much do you, at this stage in your life, revisit the haunts of the key places of your childhood, of your upbringing, of your past?
Well, every time I've been to Bombay, which I still call Bombay, I always make a visit to my old neighborhood. So it's just, for me, it's a magic space, you know, and I go up there and I feel in an enchanted space.
But is there something about that space, that
Yes.
enchanted
Yes.
space, that you need now more than ever, or that you look at differently because you've reached that last walk up the hill?
Well, I look at it from a distance now, but every time I go there, it's enormously emotional. Just to be in that little patch of this huge city, much bigger now than when I was growing up, because it's enlarged so much. But so there's huge metropolis, and in this huge metropolis, there's this tiny little dead-end alleyway, which for me is the source of everything.
You have not lived there in a very, very, very long time. You've subsequently lived in Britain and the United States. And yet you're still so connected with that seminal piece of you.
Yeah, I just think the place where you're born and raised has a magic for many of us, that nowhere else does. The idea of home, I think, is in our age when people move around so much, is a kind of plural idea. There's a sort of home which is your childhood home, about which you have a certain kind of deep feeling. And then there are homes you make for yourself. And those can be in more than one place, but they can all have the feeling of home.
You've been a citizen of 3 countries. What's home now?
Well, I mean, home now is New York City. I've lived here for 26 years. And I feel very comfortable here. And also, I think, there are cities like this one, like New York, which let you in very easily. I mean, the story of New York is a story of arrival. People come here from all over the place, not just from abroad, but from elsewhere in America. The defining song of New York is about coming here to make it. And so I've always thought one of the things that attracted me to New York City was that, you arrive and you put your bags down and you're a New Yorker.
When you received your American citizenship and were sworn in as a citizen, I think it was 2016.
Yeah, just before the 2016 election.
What did you feel as you were being sworn in and becoming a citizen?
I was quite surprised by how emotional it was, and because I'd been living here for quite a long time before that happened. Because I'd had a green card and various other ways of living here, and I remember getting into a cab, leaving the office where I'd been sworn in, and being driven back through the streets of the city, and it felt different. I thought, oh, I kind of belong, and it felt very good.
Did the feeling that you had when you were sworn in as a citizen become fractured or altered based on what's happened since, both in public life in the United States and to you?
Well, it's a hard time, that's for sure. It's a hard time in America, but it's a hard time all over. I mean, and actually, the 3 countries that I spent my life thinking about, which are India and England and America, are all going through not dissimilar kinds of hard time.
This trend where you see anti-immigrant sentiment around the world, and in the places where you've lived much of your life, as something of an expert on immigration, having been one twice, been an immigrant twice, what do you see when you see that? What do you feel? What do you worry about?
Well, of course, I don't like it, and I think my way of answering it has been to write stories and essays which celebrate immigration instead of denigrating it. Because I think great cities like this one would not be what they are were it not for immigration. Immigrants have made New York what it is, and immigrants have made London what it is. And actually, even in Bombay, it's an interesting city because it contains many different kinds of Indian. So I've always seen migration as one of the defining elements of our time, because people have, in the last 100 years, partly because of the invention of things like air travel, more people have moved across the world than in the history of the world up to that point. So So immigrants have really made the modern world. You wouldn't have Steve Jobs if you didn't have an immigrant. So much of the things that we now use every day in the world, are the creation of immigrant communities or individuals. And so I've always seen it as something to celebrate, to say this is a way of enriching life rather than impoverishing it.
But now you're seeing it erode.
Yeah, but I mean, there's enough of us who still think this way. We just have to win the argument.
One of the major themes in your life has been the promotion of free speech and creating a climate of safety for people who engage in free speech and writing. Where are we on that front?
Again, not in a very good place, I think. And that's the final story in the collection, The Old Man in the Piazza, is kind of an allegory of that, a kind of allegory. In fact, free speech, to my great surprise, language itself turned into a character, a female character. She just walked into the story and sat down in a corner. And I hadn't expected her at all. Sometimes I like it when your mind surprises you.
What's the last story about? Tell us, give us a sense of the last story.
Well, it's about an old man who sits in the corner of a town square in an unspecified city, watching the world go by.
Just an ordinary old man.
Just an old man with a cup of coffee and a croissant, and nothing much to do. And what happens in the story is that in the beginning of the story, there's a repressive time, and everybody feels very constrained in what's possible to say and what is not possible to say. And then it changes, and everybody starts opening up and arguing with each other and disagreeing, and the town square becomes a hubbub of disagreement. And he sits there and watches it all, quite enjoys being just a spectator at the feast. And then, by a series of chances, he gets sucked into the arguments and begins to see himself as an arbiter, begins to offer opinions and tell people which way they should go. And then that doesn't work out so well for him. And but there is this other character in the story, which is language itself. And she, in the beginning of the story, she's very frustrated because of the restrictions on speech. She sits in the corner of the square in a bad mood. And then she's one of the forces that makes the change, and then things get better for her, and she's surrounded by young men sucking up to her, which she likes. And at the end of the story, as things begin to get wrong again, her mood darkens again. So it's a kind of allegory of how societies move when they're closed and how they move when they're open, and what it means to move from between those two things.
At the end of that story, people can no longer speak. And the last line of that story is, words fail us. That's pretty startling and scary.
Yeah, it's supposed to be. I mean, it's supposed to say if we reach a point in our lives in which our language is no longer able to express what we want and need from the world, then we're in bad trouble, because language is what we all primarily have. And I think I've always seen writers as the guardians of the language, that it's our job to care for it, to make sure that it retains its richness and variety and openness and possibility. That's what, and I think if art can do that, if literature can do that, then it's a way of encouraging the world to do it.
And that boils down to free speech.
And that boils down to free speech, yes.
It's a reflection on the last portion, the twilight of a life, and all the things that you contemplate and think about and consider. But it's also a pretty political book.
Well, I think everything I do ends up having political dimensions, but what I want is for it to be political, but also to be funny.
It is funny.
I mean, I want funny is for me more important than political.
Really?
Yes. I think if you can make people laugh, you're doing something worth doing.
I know, but your whole life, you're one of the most famous men in the world because of what's happened to you,
which wasn't funny.
which wasn't funny, as well as for anything you've written.
Yeah, but I kind of regret that. I don't like the fact that I'm famous for the wrong reason. I would like to be well known for the things I have written, because that's what matters to me. And I think what you hope for as a writer is to leave behind a shelf of books. You want to be able to say, like, from here to here, it's me. If you're my kind of writer, you want to write things that endure. You want to write stories that will have legs. That people will want to read in multiple generations and after you're gone. I mean, I like it, the fact, for example, Midnight Children, my early book, my second book, came out in 1981. I mean, it's a long time ago. And the fact that younger readers still like it, still find it has meaning for them, so that it's crossed some of the early frontiers of generations, that's very pleasing to me.
Do you write and push yourself with that in mind?
It's always there. I mean, the thing that pushes you is the story itself. I mean, actually, when I'm writing the story, I'm not thinking about anything except the story. What does it need? What does it want? I ask the characters. I mean, often I think of writing as a process of listening. You listen to your characters, and they tell you what they need, and then you try and give it to them.
Reading Knife, listening to you in interviews and reading about you since the attack, and certainly as a result of the fatwa and so on, living in hiding, you do not seem vengeful. You do not seem bitter. You do not seem angry. Is that just your public persona, or is that actually possible?
No, I think that's who I am. I think I understood very early on that all those things you mentioned that I could have been would be very destructive to me. Destructive to me as a person, and certainly very destructive to me as an artist. And so I thought, just put that to one side. You don't have to be that person.
I find it extraordinary that it's possible to put it aside. Most people would say, well, this is a clear recipe for a life of PTSD.
Well, I do have a therapist, and I asked him at what point to list for me the symptoms of PTSD. So he said, what are the classic symptoms? And he told me. And I said, but I don't seem to be having those symptoms. So what's wrong with me? And he said, well, it's because you're badass. That's the technical term.
What a great compliment.
I said, that's psychotherapy technical term? He said, yes. I said, okay, well, I'll take that.
Have you forgiven the person who attacked you?
No, I've not forgiven him, but I've also not forgiven him. I've just dismissed him from my consciousness.
That's the worst you can do to somebody.
Yeah, I just think, indifference is the greatest punishment.
You have always talked about being godless. And that idea shows up in a lot of your work.
Yeah.
Why do you think that you are godless?
I think it's just partly because I came from a very secularized family. I mean, other bits of my family were much more religious, but my parents, were really not. And so we were brought up in a very secular atmosphere, and that's remained the case for me.
And yet, in your life, in your writing, you've had what you consider to be miracles, the miracle of your survival after the attack.
Yeah. Yes, but they're
so
not divine miracles. They're scientific miracles.
But there's a spiritualism in some of what you've lived, and certainly a lot of what you've written.
Well, I think one of the things that one does have to think about, I think that most of us, have a sense of ourselves, of whatever we call our self, the I, as being something not only to do with our physical body. That it's what philosophers have called the ghost in the machine. That there's this thing inside us which is us, and the body is its vehicle. And even if that's an illusion, it's an illusion which we all have. And so it has to be looked at if you're a writer. I mean, I also have a sense of that whatever it is that you mean when you say I is not just my hands and legs and eyes. It's something else.
Is it your soul?
Well, one of the ideas, I think I may be wrong in this because I may have misremembered it, but I think Aristotle maybe had this idea that there was such a thing as a soul, but that it was not immortal, that it was mortal, that it died when the body died.
And do you believe that?
Well, it's one way of thinking about it. I don't believe it. I mean, my belief is that we have this one life and that's it.
Where does wisdom figure into your sense of your own life, and how your experiences have rippled into your work?
I think just wisdom. What is wisdom? To my mind, it's a way you look at experience. Nobody arrives in the world wise. We're all idiots when we're born. Wisdom becomes an accumulation of knowledge based on experience, and being able to look at that clearly and see what it means for you and what it might mean for other people. So I think if you're any good as a writer, you examine your life very closely. I mean, leading the examined life is the fundamental of art. You have to look very carefully at everything that happens to you and try and see what it means, and to what happens to people around you as well, not just you. Would be a boring writer who was only interested in himself.
Do you have any sense of, if you were summing up what this extraordinary, seen by the world life that you've lived, how does that inform what you need to write about and what you are writing?
Well, as a writer, I'm always looking for the same thing. I'm looking for something I haven't done before. I really have a horror of being repetitive as a writer. That's what I'm looking for, new ground. And then eventually, there'll be this shelf of books and people can make of it what they will.
What would you like your literary legacy to be, do you think?
Well, more than 23 books.
Well, aside from inches on shelves or feet on shelves.
Just, books that stay alive in readers' minds. There are books, old books, which were very celebrated in their time, which no longer seem to have a readership. And I wouldn't like to be one of those writers. I'd like to be a writer that people still want to pick the books off the shelf.
What are the ingredients of the kind of book that you believe endures?
Well, the absolute center of it is story. I mean, it's a phrase I've used quite a lot, but I think as human beings, one of the best ways of defining ourselves is that we are storytelling animals. We are the only creature on the earth that does this peculiar thing of telling itself stories in order to understand the kind of creature that it is. We are narrative beings. We have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So our sense of ourselves is narrative. And so we respond very strongly to stories. And when a child is born, okay, first the child needs to feel loved and safe and fed and so on. But quite soon after that, it says, tell me a story. And that need for story is at the heart of what human beings are. And so what you hope to leave behind is a few good stories.